Good work. So I was away at a conference for a couple days this week. It was Preaching the Uncontrolling Love of God, which is part of open and relational theology in Denver. And it was great to be in the company of other weird-thinking people like myself who are also captivated by this open and relational view of everything. And we all have a similar story where we started off in one particular path, and that path made sense to us with all of our do's and don'ts and kept the world in a very orderly place, and God up there and us down here, and we knew what we had to do. But then the more we studied things and the more we thought about our lives and our experiences, the more we realized that maybe some of those paradigms and constructs didn't work anymore, and started to wonder if we were reading Scripture in the right way, or maybe we were missing things, or maybe we were missing some of the issues of context in the text that led us a little bit astray, finding ourselves in an ancient worldview that no longer applies. And yet even within that ancient worldview that we see throughout the whole Bible, different contexts over many centuries, there's this golden thread of this truth. There's this passage, there's this reality of God expressing God's self in those contexts all the time, and even now. And you are expressed in your own little facet, your own little jewel. And even though, I hate to break this to you, these are made of plastic. They're not real jewels. Every one of these is unique. As soon as you grabbed one of these, even though you might have the oval one like me, as soon as you grabbed it, it became unique, because whatever's in your skin, whatever oils and acids that are in your skin immediately transformed this jewel. This is as unique as you are. And you matter. There will never be anybody like you in all of creation, ever. Isn't that extraordinary? Never. There will never be anybody just like you going forward. And so when we come to Jesus and we think about what he has to say, one of the things that I think he's getting at, which we'll hopefully support today, is that when Jesus offers his teaching and offers his way, he's saying, I want to see you become your human expression of what is possible when the divine mixes with this earthly stuff of flesh and blood. What does that manifest like in you? How's that going to look? And the idea that that's even possible is extraordinary. And that's where we're going today. So we're talking about this idea of thinking about Jesus as our teacher. And there are some great things that Diana Butler Bass brings to our attention today. One of them, she actually offered some scholarship that was new to me. See, about 10 years ago or so, maybe more than that, I did a Christmas series on the work of John Dominic Crossan, who's a pretty well-known progressive theologian and scholar. And he painted Jesus in a different picture than had been painted for me in my childhood. Growing up in the tradition I did, we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about what it was really like to be Jesus. We just kind of figured he was this cute little Swedish boy running around and was well-clothed and well-educated and lived a good, solid American middle-class life, because that's the world that we knew, right? And what John Dominic Crossan does in his excellent work is he takes us back into the first century, and he reminds us that Jesus was extremely poor, that he undoubtedly missed many meals because they just didn't have enough, that he was probably wearing threadbare clothes much of his life. He was a carpenter, which was not like a finished carpenter today where you can make a pretty good buck, with cabinetry and that kind of a thing. He was a day laborer, most likely. Very, very poor, living among very, very poor people. He lived a hard scrabble life. And he lived under Roman oppression, which just made it worse. And because the Roman oppression was there was apocalyptic fever among the religious people who were hoping, that God was going to come save the day again, like God did back in Egypt and with the Exodus and all that. So there's this tension between extreme religiosity born out of great crisis. And that's kind of the context that Jesus showed up in. But then Jesus had something happen to him, and it changed his life and changed the way he thought. And one of the things that happened throughout Jesus' life is he became recognized as somebody who had something to say. And he also clearly figured out some way to become a conduit of the very presence of God in powerful ways that may have been unique to him in some particular ways. For instance, he was known even by third-party sources in antiquity as a guy who could heal. Somehow his prayers, his touch on people had healing effect. But he was also a renegade. He pushed the boundary in his thinking and interpretation of scriptures. This was the incarnation of Jesus. This is the Holy Spirit working through him. And eventually he got the term rabbi. Now, rabbi sometimes is one of these terms that is given posthumously after we die. There are some examples of that around the time that Jesus lived. But what Diana Butler-Bass gives us is really great. It says the word typically translated as teacher was the title rabbi or rabboni, a fairly new and even revolutionary term in the first century. The word rabbi did not mean a Jewish clergy person, as it does today, nor did the title appear in the Hebrew Bible. Indeed, it was just coming into use during Jesus' time for one whose teachings bore spiritual authority, a sage, a storyteller, an insightful interpreter of the law, or a particularly wise elder. According to scholars Amy Jill Levine and Mark Z. Bretler, Jesus was the earliest attested person in literature to bear the title rabbi. I'd never heard that. That's extraordinary. So before rabbi was fully developed as an idea in terms of clergy and all that, Jesus was given this not as that formal priestly kind of role, but as a wise sage. And that's really refreshing. But to give you an idea about some of the things that I think did take place in the understanding of rabbi, some things you're going to hear in this video probably develop much later. But some of the things that we hear from Rob Bell in this Pneuma video of his called Dust give us a lot of insight about what it means to be called by a rabbi. So I'll be with you after this video is done.
I want to be the kind of person who does the right thing. And I don't just mean the big things where right and wrong are obvious and easy, but I mean the small things, the subtle, unnoticed things, what I do when no one's watching. Because it's so easy to let those small things slip away. And it's those endless choices that we make every day that shape us and the kinds of people that we are. But this has started to change for me recently because I've started to believe different things about myself. A friend of mine gave me insight into the story about Jesus and his disciples that I'd heard before, but it's just taken on whole new meaning. Jesus' disciples are in a boat, and it's the middle of the night, and they're trying to get across the lake, and the wind is blowing, and it's getting choppy, and Jesus comes walking out to them on the water. Now they think he's a ghost. So they're like, Jesus, is it you? And he says, yes. And one of them, Peter, gets out of the boat and starts walking on the water towards Jesus. What is Peter thinking? And why does he believe that he can walk on water? Now, what I've come to realize is the story makes way more sense if you understand the background. Jesus is a Jewish rabbi with Jewish disciples living in a first century Jewish world. Now, Jesus grew up in a region called the Galilee, and the Jewish people in the Galilee believed that God had spoken to Moses, one of their great historical leaders, and had given him the first 5 books of the Bible. They called these first 5 books the Torah. Torah means like teaching or instructions or simply the way. And so Torah was the center, the foundation of their lives, and it was the focus of their educational system. So most Jewish boys or girls around the age of 6 would go to school for the first time to learn the Torah. It'd probably be held in the local synagogue and be taught by a local Torah teacher who was a rabbi. This first level of education was called Beit Sefer and lasted until the kid was around 10 years old. In Beit Sefer, most kids would memorize the Torah and by the age of 10 have the Torah by heart, every word. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, memorized. Now, by the end of Beit Sefer, which would be around 10 years of age, most kids were no longer going to school. They were apprenticing, learning the family trade, learning the family business, learning how to manage a household. But the best of the best would keep going. They would continue their education into the next level, which was called Beit Talmud. In Beit Talmud, the best of the best who were still going on, the ones with the most natural ability, would memorize the rest of the Hebrew scriptures. Genesis through Malachi, memorized. Now, by the end of Beit Talmud, 14, 15, most kids are learning the family business, learning the family trade, apprenticing with their parents. But the best of the best of the best would continue on to the next level of education, which was called Beit Midrash. And they'd go to a rabbi and they'd apply to that rabbi to become one of that rabbi's disciples. Now, when we use the word disciple, we often mean student, but we generally mean somebody who knows what the teacher knows. But a disciple is something far deeper. A disciple just doesn't want to know what the rabbi knows. A disciple wants to be like the rabbi and wants to learn to do what the rabbi does. Now, rabbis differed in how they interpreted the Torah. They would take like a verse or a command, and one rabbi might say, well, this is what it means to follow this verse or to do this command of God. But another rabbi might say, no, I think it means something slightly different. And so different rabbis had different sets of interpretations about how they lived out and understood and interpreted the scriptures. Now, a rabbi's set of interpretations was called that rabbi's yoke. So when you went and applied to a rabbi to become one of that rabbi's disciples, what you wanted to do is you wanted to take that rabbi's yoke upon you so that you could learn to know what the rabbi knows in order to do what the rabbi does in order to be like the rabbi. So you'd go to a rabbi and you'd say, Rabbi, I want to become one of your disciples. The rabbi would then grill you. The rabbi would ask you questions about Torah, questions about the prophets, questions about the oral tradition, because the rabbi wants to know, can this kid sit in front of me? Can this kid do what I do? Can this kid spread my yoke? Does this kid have what it takes? So the rabbi would fire off all these questions and grill the kid. And if the rabbi thought this kid's good, this kid loves God, loves Torah, but this kid isn't the best of the best of the best, the rabbi might say to the kid, you obviously love God and you obviously know the Torah, but you don't have what it takes to become one of my disciples. And so the rabbi might say something like, go and continue learning your family trade, continue plying your family trade. But if the rabbi thinks this kid has got it, I think this kid could do what I do, the rabbi would say to the kid, come, follow me. And so you would leave as this, 14, 15-year-old kid, you would leave your family, your friends, your synagogue, your village, and you would devote your entire life to being like your rabbi, learning to do what your rabbi does. This is what it means to be a disciple. So, a rabbi comes to town. a powerful rabbi. And he's got like his little pack of disciples with him, and they're doing everything they can to keep up with him because they've devoted their lives to doing what their rabbi does. So if you're a disciple, by the end of the day with your rabbi traveling on these hot, dusty, dirty roads, you've got whatever your rabbi stepped in just caked all over the front of you. And so this saying developed among the wise men and the sages. You would say to a disciple, you'd say, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. This is a scene that everybody had seen this. They knew exactly what it meant to be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Now, all of this, to me, has huge implications for Jesus and how we understand Jesus, because most rabbis would begin their teaching around the age of 30. And in the Bible, around the age of 30, we have Jesus walking down the shore along the Sea of Galilee, and he comes across Peter and Andrew, and they're fishermen. And Jesus says to them, come, follow me. Well, if they're fishermen, and Jesus calls them to be his disciples, then they're not following another rabbi. And if they're not following another rabbi, they're not the best of the best. They didn't make the cut. Then the text continues. It says that at once they dropped their nets and followed him, which I've always thought is a bit strange. I mean, it's odd, isn't it? That they just drop them and go. And I don't, some of those Christian movies don't help, do they? I mean, it's like Jesus comes down the beach and he's in this white bathrobe and he has this light blue beauty pageant sash on, you know, and his hair is blow dried and he's Swedish, and he calls the disciples and they're kind of these robots. They kind of come around and go after him. If you understand it, like in its original context, it starts to make perfect sense. I mean, rabbis were the most honored, respected, revered people anywhere. I mean, the best of the best of the best are the only ones who got to be rabbis. And this rabbi comes down the beach and says to you, come follow me. Well, what's he really saying? What he's really saying is, I think you could do what I do. I mean, he's saying you can be like me. Of course you drop your nets and follow him. And then the text even continues. It says that he comes across James and John, and they're fishing with their father Zebedee. Now, if they're fishing with their father, what are they? They're apprentices. They're learning the family business. And if he calls them to be his disciples, and they're not the disciples of some other rabbi. So James and John, they're not good enough. They didn't make the cut either. They aren't the best of the best. And how old are they? 15? 16? I mean, 20? I mean, these are not old men. They're young. I mean, Jesus chooses them because his movement is for everybody. I mean, it's for rich and for poor and for women and men and educated and uneducated. I mean, actually, what's one of the things they say about them later on? One of the things they say about them later on is, these guys are like unschooled fishermen. I mean, it's for the peasants and the scholars. It's like a movement of anybody's, and he calls them the JV, the B team, the not good enoughs. He calls them to be his disciples, and they change the course of human history. So back to the walking on water thing. I mean, you have this boat full of anybody's, and the water's choppy and the wind's blowing, and they're terrified because this Jesus comes across the water to them, and they think he's a ghost. And then Peter says, well, if it's you, then tell me to come to you. Now, why is this Peter's first response? Why is Peter's first reaction, if it's you, then tell me to come to you? Because he's a disciple. I mean, he's oriented his whole life, devoted his whole life to doing what he sees his rabbi doing, learning to be like his rabbi. So he sees his rabbi walking on water, and what's the first thing he wants to do? I want to walk on water too. I want to be like my rabbi. And so Peter gets out of the boat, and he starts walking on the water, but he starts to sink, and he yells out, Jesus, save me. And the text reads that Jesus immediately caught him and said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, I always assumed that Peter doubts Jesus, but Jesus isn't sinking. Who does Peter doubt? He doubts himself. He loses faith in himself that he can actually be like his rabbi. I mean, Jesus wouldn't have called him if he didn't think he could be like him. Jesus even reminds his disciples of this at one point. He says to them, wait, you didn't choose me, I chose you. The rabbi doesn't choose you unless the rabbi thinks that you can do what he does, that you can be like him. I mean, all my life I've heard people talk about believing in God. But God believes in us, in you, in me. I mean, faith in Jesus is important, but what about Jesus' faith in us? I mean, he must have faith in us because he leaves it all in the hands of these disciples. And what's the last thing Jesus says to them? He says to them, now you go and make more disciples. He leaves it all in the hands of these anybody's, and they do it. I mean, what if we can actually be the kinds of people that God created us to be? What if he actually believes that? I mean, what if he actually believes that we can be the kind of people who live like Jesus lived? And the kinds of people who take action because we're aware of all of these endless opportunities around us all the time for good, for beauty, for truth. I mean, Jesus has faith that you can follow him and you can be like him. He believes it. May you believe in God, but may you come to see that God believes in you. May you have faith in Jesus, but may you come to see that Jesus has faith that you can be like him. A person of love and compassion and truth. A person of forgiveness and peace and grace and joy and hope. And may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, Jesus.
So a huge take-home message from that video is that this God, this presence of God, believes in us. And to call Jesus rabbi means that this rabbi believes that we can become like him. Jesus himself said this to his disciples according to the Gospel of John. He said, "Greater things will you do in the world than even I did." That's a pretty big statement. Well, my question then is how do we develop that? How do we become that? And part of this has to do with thinking about who Jesus actually was. From the book, John A.T. Robinson, the Bishop of Woolwich in the Church of England, published a book called Honest to God, one of the best-selling and most widely read religion books of the 20th century. Among many things the bishop criticized about Christianity was the church's view that Jesus was a great spiritual teacher, a view, he said, that would result in a powerless faith and always devolve into moralism, following a list of do's and don'ts. Instead, Robinson claimed that Jesus did not merely teach love, he embodied it. Christ was utterly and completely the man for others, he wrote, because he was love. Jesus did not issue rules to be ticked off on a list. Jesus embodied the rule of love, a way of life to be followed and to be fully, completely human. So one of the things that Jesus did to help us along the way, I mean, he did give some instruction. They weren't necessarily do's and don'ts, but he did give some pretty clear things. Hey, do this and you will live and that kind of thing. But one of the things that he also did was he annoyed people with parables. And parables are these messages, these teachings, these stories that are left to us to figure out the answer to. There's no easy answer to such things. I was having a conversation many years ago with somebody, it's theological development kind of stuff, and the person just said to me, I hate the parables. And I said, why do you hate the parables? And it's like, well, if Jesus wanted me to do something, why didn't he just say, do it this way or think this way? And the point of the parables is to put the burden of thinking on us. Dar kind of jokingly said that for our Crosswalk 101 thing, you know, if you've truly stumped me, it's when I say back to you, what do you think, before giving you the answer. Well, sometimes that might be true, but most of the time, it's I realize that if I'm the only one doing the homework to figure out an idea or to sort something out, it's not going to be any benefit to you. So if you've got a question about whatever hot topic, I could give you some things to think about, but until you do the work of thinking this stuff through on your own and internalizing it, it's not going to get you very far. The parables are a vehicle to help us think. And so I've given you in your handout today just a handful. There's like, 30 or so parables that we have recorded of Jesus talking. Some say even more than that, depending how you define parable. And we're just going to walk through these. I might give you an idea or two to think about these. This is going to take forever. But I wanted you to take this with you. And two things, by the way, this week. First thing, this is your little jewel thing. Mine's really interesting. Some of the backing wore off. And so some of it's reflecting back at me, and some I can see all the way through it. And I thought, that's interesting. So I see myself through some of these facets, and I see you through some of these facets and the rest of the world. The other thing I want you to do, so you're going to hold on to this, put it in your pocket, put it by your cereal bowl, wherever you're going to see it. The other thing is I want you to keep this by your cereal bowl or wherever you read. And I don't want you to read it just once or think about it just now. I want you to think about it throughout the week and see what happens. So here we go. Let's just crunch through some of these and see what's there for us. Though the parable of cloth and wineskins. No one sews a piece of new unshrunk cloth on old clothes, because the patch tears away the cloth and makes a worse tear. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. If they did, the wineskins would burst, the wine would spill, and the wineskins would be ruined. Instead, people pour new wine into new wineskins so that both are kept safe. So this is one of those stories where you're like hearing it and you're like, and? And Jesus just leaves it there for us. Like, here you go. Here's the gem of the day. Think about cloth. Think about wineskins. And that's the point. And there's actually great depth here, if we'll have it. Now think about the patch on clothes. And I bet some of you have some old sweatshirts that you don't want to give away because you thought they were cool one day and they might still be cool. They're super comfortable, and they might have a hole or two in them. And I think what I'm getting here from this is, if you do a new thing onto that, you're going to ruin both. Your favorite sweatshirt's toast because it's not going to work with the new fabric. And there are some new ways of thinking and paradigms that we need to think about this with our lives, not just thinking about God. Certainly theologically this is true. There is a reality that you really can't have it both ways theologically. You can't have a cosmology and a theology that keeps everything just as it was from an ancient worldview where God literally is up there somewhere in heaven. You can't have that same theology and cosmology when we realize that God is really everywhere all the time. Present everywhere, all the time, in everyone. They don't go together, and so we have to respect both for what they're doing. Richard Rohr does a beautiful work with this and just helping us honor the two different realities. We honor the clothes of the past that helped us, but we also need to honor and respect the new things coming. This may be true of your stages in life. The way things that you used to do things aren't going to work going forward. And some of your children maybe are coming to you asking you to do new things in new ways, and you're thinking to yourself, I'm an old sweatshirt. I'm an old wineskin. Don't blow my world apart. I'm fine, just the way it is. And maybe you are. And we let them do their new thing. I think about our church here and who we were when I first arrived in 1999. And if I would have told the church of 1999, First Baptist Church of Napa, hey, tomorrow we're going to be like this, I probably would have gotten fired before my first week was up. Because you can't just do that. Both need to be respected, where we've been and where we need to go. I wonder what this means to you. I've just given you a handful of things, but I bet there are some even more deeply apropos meanings of this parable for you. And I hope you'll chew on it this week. How is this parable of Jesus, or these two, how is this true in your life? The next one's great too. The parable of the soils. He said many things to them in parables. A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep, but when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among the thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention. Some of us might interpret this as, well, what kind of soil was I born into? Why didn't faith stick better for me or for somebody else? And we look at the soils that we inherited just by our birth accident. And we recognize, well, no wonder I struggled. I was in rocky soil the whole time. No choice of my own. Some of us may look at this and think, well, what kind of soil am I choosing now? Am I choosing to try to build a faith in very rocky soil or very exposed soil? Or am I trying to foster a rich, deep faith because I am choosing to have vital soil with great vigor in it? Somebody in the first service had a great insight thinking, what kind of soil are we in the lives of other people? How are we helping people develop in their own lives? Great midrash on his part. I wonder how many more ways you're going to resonate with Jesus' story here. We got another one kind of like that, still on the agricultural stuff. And by the way, you'll notice there's a slight difference between what's on the screen and what's in your handout. I modified yours in the handout. Sometimes when we see kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven, that kind of sets us in weird directions, and we think of an other time. And one of the words that can be used somewhat synonymously with the kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God is just this word love or shalom. And I would submit to you that if you just put the word love in the place of kingdom of heaven in this, I think it's going to work out pretty good and still be true. So, love is like someone who planted good seed in his field. While people were sleeping, an enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat and went away. When the stalks sprouted and bore grain, then the weeds also appeared. The servants of the landowner came and said to him, Master, didn't you plant good seed in your field? Then how is it that it has weeds? An enemy has done this, he answered. The servant said to him, do you want us to go and gather them? But the landowner said, no, because if you gather the weeds, you'll pull up the wheat along with them. Let both grow side by side until the harvest. And at harvest time, I'll say to the harvesters, first gather the weeds and tie them together in bundles to be burned, but bring the wheat into my barn. And you might be wondering, what the heck does this have to do with my life? Well, you're going to have to think about that a little bit. One helpful insight I got from Richard Rohr, who's one of my mentors who will never know my name. He's an author and a great thinker in my worldview, in my way of thinking. As he said, this is a great parable of life, that our world is filled with the complexity of wheat and weeds growing together. You can't just strip it out. And actually, this is true of our very individual lives. I am a mix of wheat and weeds. They're together. You can't rip one out without ripping me totally apart. How weedy are you? And there's some great hope in here that at some point, there's going to be a release from the weeds, that we can shine in all of our beautiful jewelness and our wheatiness, whatever that might be. I take great hope in that. And who knows what this might mean to you. So let's keep trucking. The parable of the mustard seed. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven, or love, is like a mustard seed that someone took and planted in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it's grown, it's the largest of all vegetable plants. It becomes a tree so that the birds in the sky come and nest in its branches. The parable of the yeast is like it. Then he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast, which a woman took and hid in a bushel of wheat flour until the yeast had worked worked its way through all the dough. This is the one that Dave talked to us about earlier. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that somebody hid in a field, which someone else found and covered up. Full of joy, the finder sold everything and bought that field because they recognized its value. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. When he found one very precious pearl, he went and sold all that he owned and bought it. So these are some parables that are lesser known. And the more we sit with them, the more we realize that they are speaking profound truth into life, about life itself, about our life with God. And this final one that we have is one of the two most favorite and most well-known parables of Jesus. The first one, or one of the two most famous parables, is the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. And then there's this one, which, to go back to Rob Bell's video, ask the question, if we're really going to be like Jesus, what does that mean about how we live our lives in the world? And here we go. I'm sure you've heard it. A legal expert stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to gain eternal life?" And Jesus replied, "What is written in the law? How do you interpret it?" And he responded, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "Well, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But the legal expert wanted to prove that he was right. So he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So this legal guy was just looking for a tick the boxes kind of faith. Just make sure I'm saying the right things, believing the right things, and I'm good with God. And Jesus turns the table on him with this question about neighborliness. Jesus replied, "A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He encountered," by the way, there are so many interesting, very tempting nuggets for me to share with you about this story along the way, which just flesh this thing out. I'm not going to do it because of time. But just at face value, everybody understands what Jesus is saying. Just know there's so much more. A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He encountered thieves who stripped him naked, beat him up, and left him near death. Now it just so happened that a priest was also going down the same road. When he saw the injured man, he crossed over to the other side of the road and went on his way. Likewise, a Levite, that was sort of like a deacon in the church, came by that spot, saw the injured man, and crossed over to the other side of the road and went on his way. A Samaritan, who was on a journey, came to where the man was. But when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. Just a quick side note, the Samaritan would have immediately been looked at with terrible disdain. He was the enemy of the Jews. When they heard a Samaritan entered the scene, they thought maybe he was the robber coming back to look for more stuff. So he's a hated person, and he's the one who sees him and was moved with compassion. The Samaritan, of all people, went to him and bandaged his wounds, tending them with oil and wine. Then he placed the wounded man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took 2 full days' worth of wages and gave them to the innkeeper. He said, "Take care of him, and when I return, I will pay you back for any additional costs." What do you think? Which one of these 3 was a neighbor to the man who encountered the thieves? Then the legal expert said, "The one who demonstrated mercy toward him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." So here you and I are sitting in 2024. Somewhere just shy of 2,000 years ago, there were a bunch of people who sat listening to Jesus and wondering, what do we do next, particularly after Easter was over. And they decided together to believe the words of Jesus and to follow the life example that Jesus gave them. And they went forward having faith in themselves and in God. And they changed everything. They decided to lean in to their jewelness so that they might become everything they were meant to become. This is bigger than a just live your best life thing that you can get off of any newsstand. This is deeper and richer because we are asking we have the audacity to think, because of Jesus' teaching, that we can actually ask the very ground of being, the very Spirit of God, higher power, whatever you call that thisness, that other presence in life, that is bigger than flesh and blood. We have the audacity to say, to welcome this thing into our lives, to guide us, to empower us, to inform us, to show us what it means to live, to do this as well as we can. Not under threat that if you don't, you're going to be in big trouble, but the invitation of becoming. What might that be for us? And the beauty of Jesus' example is that he lived love. And he says to his disciples, my yoke is easy, my students, this yoke that I'm putting over you to say you're my students, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Come and follow me. Let's be lovely. Let's be who we are in all of our radiant beauty. And let's change the world together. To that end, I'm going to lead us in a quiet prayer, silent prayer, and then we're going to end with this adaptation of the Lord's Prayer. And instead of Abba, which usually shows up in this rendition, we go teacher. Because I learned in this book, this was news to me, that not only can Abba mean daddy, that's what has most likely been, or most what I've assumed, but it can also be interpreted as teacher. And so we'll end with this version of the Lord's Prayer in just a second. But for now, I just invite you once again, close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. Take a deep breath. Let's just enjoy a moment of silence. And as you're quiet, and when I shut up here in just a moment, I'm wondering if you might have ears to hear the still, small voice of God speaking to you what you need to hear right now. Maybe from the video, from the parables, from the songs, from the jewel. What is the voice of God whispering in your ear today? God, while Jesus was still living and breathing in this way that we do, he told the disciples that he would be gone and that another teacher, another advocate would come. That would be the very Spirit of God that had led him, that had instructed him, that had strengthened him. He said that same Spirit, in the same ways, would be available for all who follow him. And so we rely on that. We trust in that. Like Peter getting out of the boat into the water, we choose to believe your belief in us. God, help us. Help us listen. Help us believe. Help us move forward with love, with shalom, with faith. To that end, we pray this prayer, this rendition of the prayer that you taught us to pray. Let's say it together. Our loving, supportive, holy teacher, and everywhere, thank you. May your divine commonwealth come. May your will be done through us. We are grateful for the gift of food and work for all to eat their fill. May we work for a world where mutual grace and respect abound. May we foster shalom everywhere. Strengthen us for the work to which we're called. Amen. May it be so. Thanks for coming. Hope you had a great experience. Hope to see you this week. Take care. All right.